so we're going to continue reading our book, Step Right Up. And if you remember, the last thing we read yesterday was the colt was born, and it didn't really fit the expectation that Doc had for this horse. And he was sad, and people were telling him to put the horse out of his misery. And so we're going to find out what happens with that. Under Doc's care, Jim's health improved, and his curiosity grew. Jim seemed to study Doc's every move, even when Doc played with his dog. Then one day, Jim zigzagged over with a stick dangling from his mouth. Doc laughed and tossed the stick away. Jim stumbled after it like a clumsy dog. He was a knowing colt, I tell you, Doc said. He showed me how he could fetch and proceeded to try to do the other tricks the dogs could do. Jim learned to sit, play dead, act sick, and roll over on cue. When Jim was about a year old, Loretta died. Doc was heartbroken, but he also worried about Jim. The orphan colt needed looking after night and day. So Doc coaxed Jim up the porch steps and through the front door of his house. The young horse made himself right at home. Why do you think he let the colt come live with him? Why do you think that was a big deal that the colt came to live with him? To maybe make him feel secure, to maybe make him have a home. What text evidence proves that Doc shows he loves and has feelings for animals? What sentences did we read that made you think he really loves animals, or he really has a lot of feelings for animals? I'm going to tell you right now, I don't care about what it is. A horse is not living in my house. Okay? So I think that shows a lot of love for the animals. When Doc counted money, Jim watched. When Doc wrote letters, Jim watched. When Doc opened and closed drawers, Jim watched. Pretty soon he began to pick at me, trying to intimidate me, Doc said. Imitate. In time, Jim's legs straightened and he muscled up. He grew into a handsome young stallion and too big for the house. Doc knew it was time for his four-legged house guest to move back to the stable. But Jim kicked up a mighty ruckus until Doc started sleeping on a cot next to his stall. Then Doc moved his desk and most of his office. Before long, he was practically living in the stable with Jim. A while ago, it used the words Jim watched, Jim watched, Jim watched. Why do you think the author used that repetition? Why did he use that repetition of Jim watched, Jim watched? To really emphasize that he was watching what his owner was doing so maybe that he could learn? When Doc was ready to hitch up the medicine wagon again, he decided to bring Jim along as his newest attraction. Doc held up a bottle of Keystone liniment and announced for people to gather around. He told the crowd how his sickly, crippled colt had grown strong and healthy. Right on cue, Jim pretended to be sick. He limped and drooped and snorted and wobbled. Then Doc gave Jim a spoonful of medicine and massaged a dollop of liniment into his legs. Suddenly, Jim acted well again. He pranced around, frisky as a pup. The audience clapped and laughed and lined up to buy Doc's medicines. The stable was transformed into a horse-sized classroom, and Doc painted sugar on a cardboard square marked with the letter A and held it up to Jim. A, Doc said, and Jim swiveled his ears and listened. Then he licked the card until it was soggy. Doc created a new card out of 10. Every day he patiently repeated, A, and as he slipped the card between Jim's lips, for weeks Jim just licked the sugar and stared blankly at his teacher. Doc sighed and shook his head, but kept at it. Why do you think it said he stared blankly? What does that mean? What is that showing about their process and what they're doing right now? Well, I think it shows that what they're doing, he's not learning. He's just licking the sugar and he's not really getting anything out of it yet. After 6 months, Jim finally understood. If Doc called for the letter A, Jim grabbed the right card and dropped it into Doc's hand. In no time, Jim learned to fetch the B card, then the C card, then all the way to the Z card. Doc was proud. He rewarded Jim with an apple or a sugar cube for each correct answer. Next, Doc had Jim combine letters to spell words, choose numbers to make sums, find flags to identify states, move clock hands to tell time, and a whole lot more. When it was time for Jim to learn to write, Doc painted Jim's name with a sugar on a whiteboard. It took months for the horse to learn to lick the pattern of his name. Then Doc slipped some chalk between Jim's teeth so the horse could write his name. The chalk crumbled. They needed a bigger piece. 7 years passed quickly in Jim's private classroom. The more kindness Doc heaped on Jim, the more willing the horse was to learn. Doc was now ready to show the world what Jim could do. So with lots of patience and lots of practice, they have like a skill or a trick, if that's what we want to call it. Their chance came in 1897 at the Tennessee Centennial Exposition, a huge fair held in Nashville. Doc Key had been asked to help plan a building where African Americans could showcase their art, culture, and interventions. Doc asked the fair directors if he could exhibit Jim. At first, the directors laughed. A horse that could read, spell, write, and do sums? Ridiculous. But as one of the organizers of the fair, Doc insisted that Jim have a stage of his own. Soon visitors were strolling past a giant seesaw and past Edison's new moving picture machine to see Jim. Throughout the fairgrounds, people chattered about the remarkable, educated horse. So tomorrow, we're going to find out what happens after the fair.